Welcome, everyone. My name is Admas Kanyagia, and I'm the Director of Social Impact at GitHub. So my role is all about thinking about how open source can address the pressing social problems of our time. And today's conversation with our panelists is just all about that. Social sector actors from foundations to nonprofits to government organizations and others are now looking to open source as a solution to addressing many of the issues that they see in the world around us. And so today, I'm so excited to be joined by these two panelists. The first is Gunho Lee. And so Gunho Lee is the CTO for Enuma and Kitkit schools and is actually a finalist for the Global Learning XPRIZE, which he will talk about soon. And then also John Jones, he's the Vice President of Interactive Strategies at the CASE Foundation, and he will talk about their work in open source. So welcome to our panelists. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Okay, great. So I thought how we could start is by having each of you share a little bit about your work. One, share a little bit about your journey to becoming a developer, and then talk about your projects, and in particularly the types of problems you are trying to solve, and the type of solutions that you've been able to bring to bear through open source or other technologies. So, John, why don't you begin?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, very excited to be here. So Case Foundation is the family foundation of Steve and Jean Case. We've been around for over 20 years, and we've always been very passionate about finding ways to democratize technology and really use technology for good. One of the ways we've been really looking at that in the past few months is open source, and how particularly open source can be used to really accelerate the missions of nonprofits and foundations. Kind of our rallying cry is that open source is really a form of philanthropy. When you think about it, one gift of code to a community, to any community, is an inexhaustible gift. That's something when you look at sort of the traditional philanthropic world, the traditional foundation world, it's a really unique idea. Oftentimes when I go to talk to nonprofits or foundations about open source, it's still to some people extremely mind-blowing. And it's like, oh wow, you're giving it away for free to anyone to use. It's amazing, that's really cool. And so our mission, what we're working on right now, is helping educate nonprofits and foundations and say, hey, you're creating great technology, you're using great technology, you should be giving that back so that your peers can use it and iterate off of your work. Iterate off of your work whether it's a success or a failure. It's a great thing about the open source community. And so we're working very hard to try to really bring the open source community and the nonprofit community together. Because like I said, for the nonprofit community, it's an accelerative kind of idea. And for us, for the open source community, it's a way to give back, which is really, really interesting that contributing to open source code, we all know, is a way to sort of get involved and to advance your career. But it's also a way to devote some of your time to a cause you care about. Doing work in the open for something you're passionate about or an organization you are eager to support. It's just as valuable as a financial contribution or volunteering in some other way. Volunteering with your skills, with your talent as coders, is hugely, hugely valuable to some of these organizations. I'm a coder by background. I've been coding since I was like 10 years old. I learned BASIC on like an old Apple II. And from the time I first started coding till today, I'm still always amazed by sharing and iteration. And that's something I want to take from this community and bring it to this broader sort of nonprofit change-making community. So a couple ways we're doing that and working on that right now. So one is we're walking the walk. We've made a commitment to open source a lot of the technology we build. So we have a couple open source projects out there. We've released some analytics tools that we use internally, a couple different kind of marketing tools. We're also going to be open sourcing a data visualization we built to show impact investing work. So that's going to be coming out later this year. But really demonstrating to the community what open source is and how it works. And then the next part of it is education. Going to nonprofits, going to foundations, different places where these organizations play, and teaching them what open source is. How do you operationalize it? Why does it work the way it does? We all get it. Like we know, like this is the, I'm preaching to the converted here, but for a lot of these organizations, they are so excited to learn what nonprofit, or what open source can do for the nonprofit ecosystem. So next steps with that is, actually I need your help. really. So if you are passionate about giving back in terms of open source to causes you care about, get in touch with me, and let's talk about how we can kind of further help each other bring these two ecosystems together, this great ecosystem of technologists here, and all of these different ecosystems of nonprofits, these change makers, people who see problems in the world and are working to solve them, oftentimes using technology, but I think our world and their world can do absolutely amazing things when we start to work together. That sort of diverse crowd of us thinking about problems, solving problems using code, using infrastructure, and them thinking about what are the real problems and how do we bring these two things to bear. There's so much work to do. So eager to be here talking about it.
Great, thank you, John. And you and I talk a lot about this idea of bringing the social sector and technology sector together, and it's quite a conundrum.
Yeah, but exciting problem to solve.
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly, great. All right, Gunho, I'd love you to share a little bit about your own developer journey and the work that you're doing with the XPRIZE, but I understand you have a presentation, so we're happy to listen to your presentation first.
Right. The usual presentation about the social impact work is that, it is for non-profit or NGOs, but actually there are many corporate companies as well, because I mean, they see a huge business opportunity as well. So I will just briefly talk about what we do here.
Great.
So it is basically education, and let's talk about the future of education. So actually this is from the cartoon from the French newspaper in 19th century, and the title Future of the Classroom. So it is a little different from what we see today, right? We don't have the paper grinder or the electric devices that goes directly into the brain. But the point is that they imagined that technology would change the way how we learn. And actually it did. For example, Blackboard, or pencils, or video, or YouTube these days. I mean, by those technologies, I mean, they made education more accessible and affordable so that more people can have quality education. But still, there are 250 million children who cannot read, write, or do the basic math. So to solve this problem, Global Learning XPRIZE has launched. So to give you some background about XPRIZE, actually, the XPRIZE Foundation has been launched various prizes to solve global scale problems. So for example, for the first ever XPRIZE, named Ansari XPRIZE, was about launching unmanned, but non-government team to launch the reusable rocket into space. And then one team won the prize. It became the seed of Virgin Galactica. And then you see these days, rise of private space travel industry, right? Actually, the idea came from you may remember Charles Lindbergh, who flew across the Atlantic. Actually, he was after the OTAC award. And then actually he won that prize. And then you now know, there is a huge airline industry. And then the same idea, they want to show the solution exists for some problem, and then ignite further development of this solution. So we, happened to participate this challenge and became one of the finalists. And this is how it works. So basically, about 4 years ago, they launched the prize, and then about 300 teams have been registered. And then among them, 5 finalists have been chosen last year. And then since then, 15 months field test began. And then there are 4,000 children participating in it, and from about 150 villages. And then what they do is, at the beginning, they just do the exam to children, and then distribute tablet pieces with one of those finalist software. And then that's it. And after 15 months, they will test again, and then the award will be given to the team who made greatest learning game. And then there will be one village mom assigned to each village, and what she does is basically help children recharging the devices using those solar panel. So there is no structure, no pressure, no program, SO, whatever. And so, we will see how it turns out. And then the question is that how come we get into this? So one of the requirements of this global learning XPRIZE is that because they want to see not just the final solution, but also they want to develop the solution further. So one of the requirements is that the 5 finalists must release the solution open source. And then we are actually a for-profit company, so we just kind of debate inside. So we define Enuma, our company, as mission-driven, for-profit startup. So by saying mission-driven, we are committed to our mission, which is make exceptional learning software for all children. So by saying all, we mean including children with special needs, also with various learning difficulties. So we have been focusing on making product as accessible as possible and also as engaging as possible so that children can teach themselves even without adults' intervention. But at the same time, so we are a for-profit company, so when we first heard this idea, so we thought that, oh, this is what we do the best. So if we are not doing this, who will do this? But we have to convince our board of directors and also ourselves that this is a bet worth making. Yeah. So long story short, yeah, we decided to go. So that's why I'm here to talk about this. And so, but beside all the common issues or debates around making open source, actually there was one interesting positive side effect. As John said, so, the awareness about open source is growing actually for all those government agencies and organizations and foundations. So actually pledging to become open source helped us a lot to get support of those organizations. So, especially government agencies, they don't want to put the tax money into private company. But if the research become open source and then public asset, it is totally different story. So yeah, it helped a lot. And it was not just getting the old money, grant money, but having them backed on us actually enabled us to reach their network, and which is really essential to work in those countries. And also, so regarding improving our product, but also finding some business opportunities, we got a lot of help. So the field testing is still ongoing. It will finish next year, so we don't know how the results comes. But as far as we see the log data from the field, we are not allowed to access those areas, or we don't know how other teams are doing. But if we look at the log data and also the result from observation from our own test sites, yeah, we are positive that we made something works there. So we'll see. Okay. So before finishing my introduction, I just want to share one of my favorite video that is from our test sites. Yeah, when we see, those children, those actions actually encourage us, make us thinking that, oh, we are doing the right thing, and then make something works. So yeah, it was great. So as a for-profit company, so not only we are doing something good, but also we see lots of opportunities there. Yeah. So great. Yeah, I hope it works out.
Thank you. I hope you win as well. A couple of things that you said, Gunho, really resonated with me. I think this idea of how you convince your board to take on an open source project, to actually release software that actually would have had market value for you as a for-profit company, and to make it open source. And I think that one of the things that we think about open source is this idea of a network, and the network effects that happen, the connections that happen across different both individuals, communities, as well as organizations. So maybe let's talk about that. And you started talking a little bit about connecting to some of the folks across that network. How has that been? How easy or difficult has it been to connect to others who are also working in open source, and how has open source been able to open the doors to having these conversations that you wouldn't have had before?
Yeah, so to be clear, this is not open source yet,
Yes,
because
yeah,
it is competition.
yeah.
I mean, it'll be open source at the end of the competition. Yeah, I mean the XPRIZE competition. But actually, I mean, when we say that it will be open sourced, when we actually, not only our team members, but also we have a lot of helpers, like contributors or contractors, and then most of them are really excited about, I mean, contributing to this kind of project. And then also they're contributing to the open source project as well. So, because they're not just work for the company, but also for I mean, there's some possibility, right? So right now we are making this in Swahili language, also in English. But by being open source, there will be always possibility of making us in other languages, right? I mean, so there's a bunch of other languages that we cannot do ourselves. And then and some folks, I mean, and also we are even making some sign language feature. So, I mean, the Swahili sign language, though, Tanzanian sign language, I mean. And then, so it was really exciting to see that those people just wanted to help us. And then, because it was open source, they are willing to just help. And then sometimes we pay, of course, and then, but sometimes they just want to help. And then this is the power of open source, I guess.
Yeah, great. Yeah, John, could you speak a little to that?
Yeah, I think when we talk about open source, particularly when we're talking to nonprofits and foundations, you bring up a really good point that giving them code away for free is that not chipping away at your competitive advantage? And what we say in sort of the audiences we're talking to is you shouldn't be thinking about it in terms of competition. If you're open sourcing something and someone else finds value in it, if it's something you built to solve a problem you have, maybe you should be working together to solve the same problem. Particularly when it comes to nonprofits. The missions of nonprofits are to solve the world's problems. If you can meet in this venue of code and try to solve the same problem together, that's awesome. That's a great way to chip away at the same problem. So really for us, we turn that on its head and say there's no reason you shouldn't be sharing your code, because it's a way to further your mission. It's a way to further grow your supporters and your allies. For nonprofits, there's really nothing but upside for open source to find those allies and to speed up how quickly you can build things.
Yeah,
of course, there is downside for company though. So because I mean, as you know, most of open source softwares are basically tools or infrastructure stuff.
Yeah.
But ours are contents. Right?
Yes.
So it's really different to how to make business out of it is kind of issue, and the kind of tricky thing. So how we think is that so basically the environment of XPRIZE is kind of artificial. You know, they're just giving away tablets to the village, and then without worrying about losing the devices or something like that. But if some organization, or for example school, they really worry about breaking up the devices, and then they want to manage the devices, and then students, and then those kind of tools are kind of really essential for them. So maybe providing those things, maybe what they need, and that's what we are thinking about it right now.
Thank you. No, that resonated me, and thinking about sort of this idea of challenges, and some of the challenges that you face as you're thinking about managing or launching an open source project. And so you spoke about one, Gunho, but are there other challenges that you think would be helpful? And rather they're sort of maybe like hard lessons learned as you're moving through this work and thinking about the opportunity that open source has for it. So maybe John, you can start.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think one of the challenges we encounter. And particularly the way we encounter the challenges is when we're out there trying to educate. One of the challenges we often receive is from more established players, larger organizations. They say, well, open source, there's, is that safe? What about support? And so taking people along on that ride and saying that no, open source, you're engaging with a community, not necessarily one partner who's going to always be there, but maybe a whole community of them. So that's one of the challenges, I think, is sort of, it's a little bit of a fearless step to rely on the community, I think, for a lot of these players where their tech budget isn't huge, and so they are concerned about how much investment they're going to have to make. And so part of this education process we're doing is to say, no, in the long run, you're going to save money, you're going to go farther with this community. So that's one of the, I think that's one of the challenges. I think when those more established players,
Yeah.
a lot of young nonprofits we see are more excited about open source, and we're working a lot with them. But a lot of these large organizations, it's going to take some time for us to bring them around on the open source bandwagon.
I can imagine large, like international development aid organizations.
Exactly. No,
it's hard to move those ships.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Similarly, actually, it hasn't come to our reality yet, but how to maintain the community or the open source code base is kind of, challenge for us anyway. And then another thing is that, I said, most of people are excited about the open source, but there are some people don't like the idea, right? For example, when we hire some subcontractor for making something, and then when they are told it will be open source, they said, no. So that kind of stuff all happen all the time. So sometimes we convince them or pay more, or just say bye-bye. It kind of happens. So the open source is great idea, but it is not for everybody. So you need to either convince them or be prepared that there is somebody that doesn't like the idea.
Yeah. Great. Okay, well, we'd love to open the Q&A to the audience in case there are folks who have questions for John or for Gunho around their work. So I think the way we've done this in previous sessions is that folks can sort of stand up and say their question, and then I'll repeat it because we don't have, I think, walking mics to share with folks. But just wanted to invite if there are folks in the audience who would like to pose a question.
Over there.
Yes.
Yeah. You can.
I'll repeat the question.
Yeah.
What's the best way to reach out to John or Gunho in terms of participating in the open source work that they're doing? So.
Yeah, I think if you want to talk about how to get involved, shoot me a message on Twitter. I'm pretty good about getting back that way. So I'm John Jones 4, number 4 on Twitter, and let's talk. I'd love to hear how you'd love to get involved in certain open source projects, but also advice on how we kind of bring these communities together. So it's a problem we're continually trying to solve. So there's a couple different ways I think we can plug in.
Gunho?
Yeah, as well. Basically, we have the website for the Kitkit school, and then there's email so that you can reach out by email, and there is actually other teams in global learning XPRIZE as well, so you can reach out to them or the XPRIZE Foundation.
Great.
Cool.
Thank you.
And also follow me on GitHub, John Jones 4, also on there.
Yeah. First and foremost.
And follow Case Foundation on GitHub also, just Case Foundation. Check out our projects. Also take a look at those.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Any other questions? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll repeat the question. So the question was about bandwidth in the work that both John and Gunho are doing. What is the experience around bandwidth limitations or constraints, especially working in developing countries?
Do you want to?
So if it means the internet bandwidth, we don't have any problem because we don't assume any internet because there's no internet and it is just standalone device. And so the way we collect the log is that there is some solar station, right? And then there is some small Arduino server. And whenever the device is being charged, it detects it's being charged and then send the log to the Arduino server. And then every 2 weeks, the person from UNESCO just visiting the village and then swap out the SD card and then collect them and literally FedEx it to the LA where the XPRIZE Foundation is headquartered. And then the data will be sent to us. And also when we give them update, actually there is no internet update, something like that. So they gave us 2 opportunities to update the binary. And then when it happens, they just literally swap out to a new device. So no user data will be, success. So it's just gone. So we basically take the approach of delivering sequel of old package games. Like it's just, totally new thing. So that way, we don't have any problem. But yeah, actually, we wanted to have internet connection as well. And then also in those countries, actually wireless internet is really everywhere. So even though there is no, electrics or landed line, people always, carrying around the cell phone or even smartphone. So the wireless internet is there. So I hope we could access them.
I think for us, in terms of bandwidth, we're committed to open source in a way that we're open source first, and so when we take on a project, we ask ourselves, is this something we think we can share with the community, and then how much can we commit to making sure we can sustain something as an open source project? But where I think, where I've seen bandwidth problems is when we share open source projects or we're talking to other nonprofits who are trying to use open source solutions, and the barrier to entry to use open source technology, if you don't have an in-house tech team or somebody who's pretty tech savvy on staff, can be pretty high. Code can be intimidating to a non-coder, it's understandable. And so organizations that want to take advantage of open source code, helping them understand how you can get from, okay, here's the GitHub project to, okay, here's a fully functioning spin-up implementation of what you're trying to use. Those steps in between are not clear to a non-coder, and so we're working to educate people about how that works, and we're looking to find tools and ways to speed that process up, to get from like, cool, I found a great project on GitHub I want to use, to, okay, this is actually helping me achieve my mission. Closing that gap as much as possible is something we're working very hard to try to do. Really excited about Actions, actually, because I think there's some cool ways I want to try to experiment with that to see how we can close that gap. But that's where we've seen sort of bandwidth and I think capacity challenges is getting from the start to the end in terms of actually leveraging open source for organizations that want to use. It's something, we're trying to figure that out all the time.
Yeah. No, I often think about sort of connectivity and bandwidth as building blocks that are necessary, sort of foundations that need to be put in place before we think about these solutions.
Absolutely.
And they're very real barriers right now to really the scale and possibilities that these solutions can really offer, and we need to pay attention.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Totally.
Yeah. Any last questions? Yeah.
Someone there.
Take one more.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. No. Happy to repeat the question. So the question was, sort of how have these solutions changed or iterated as a result of being implemented in different kinds of cultures? And so I'll pose it to John and Gunho.
Yeah. Actually, there's one example.
Yeah.
So it, taught us that it's really important to do actual observation what's happening. So the first time when we deployed our software to our own test sites, the result was not that good. Children are not doing anything. So we flew there and then see what's happening, and then it turns out that because the children are taught from home that they don't touch valuable things. So when they're given the tablets, they're just looking at it. For 2 hours. And then until they're told that you can touch the devices. So we didn't know about it. So later we added some videos that the adults came in and tell them, you can just play around it, don't just throw it. That kind of video. And then it's kind of getting better. And so that kind of stuff. So we didn't realize that happened. Yeah. And also another thing is that, so we thought that we put some setting button on the right upper corner, and really small, so for the teachers and administrators. And then thinking that when children will just press the big button that is left upper side, but the thing is that children just keep pressing that button right side. And then the funny thing is that the children who can read press the left button. But the children who cannot read keep pressing right button because that's a,
That's how you read.
by instinct, maybe.
Yeah.
So, we didn't, imagine that. So later we'll just, totally, removed it. But, so actually deploying it to the place or site and then doing some observation is really critical. That's the lesson we learned.
Yeah, and John, maybe you can speak to that in terms of different kinds of organizational cultures. 'Cause
Yeah.
I think that's what you're familiar with.
Yeah, that's a little more familiar
Yeah.
with that. So I think one of the areas where I'm seeing that actually done really well is in civic tech. So organizations like Code.gov, Code for America, those are they're thinking about that in really interesting ways, sharing between different civic institutions, and then thinking about beyond the civic institutions, how are those shared? So it's the way we're always trying to think about it is nonprofits and like these sort of civic groups, they're trying to solve people problems. And so taking it down to that level and understanding how you need to think about the technology is really the key part of it when you really get down to the people. So it manifests in a number of different ways throughout these different ecosystems. Yeah.
Great. We'll take one last question, if there's a last question for the group, but if not, no worries. Oh, yes, okay, thank you.
I wonder if you have some ideas how to deal with the attrition problem that you often have when you have a distributed community of developers working on social problems, because often you don't have the money to pay them all, so you sort of have to keep people motivated. I wonder if you have some good strategies or experience how this can be effective.
So the question is how do you deal with attrition of developers working across, working in your community, especially on social good projects where you can't pay them for their time, folks are volunteering often at the end of their jobs, I understand. And how do you keep them motivated and activated towards supporting this work? So.
Yeah, that's a problem the whole open source community faces. And the way, when I've talked to folks in the worlds we're working in and the broader open source ecosystem, and I know it's a little bit of a dead horse, but documentation is that's the first thing you need to be thinking about with an open source project, that developers are going to come and go on an open source project, and that's okay, but you need to track every stage of a project's lifecycle in documentation, in issues, so that there's always a history that you can go back and audit. I think it's the one way, and I think when we think about the work we're doing, also what it comes down to at the end of the day is we want to see organizations taking responsibility for their open source projects and shepherding them along, that there is a level of going back to this idea of philanthropy, that if they are giving this code to the community, they do need to put some resources behind it to make sure that they sustain it, that they're not just throwing code out there and saying, hey, cool, we're sharing it, but saying, no, we're sharing this and we want you to come help us, but we're also going to be driving this project forward and taking ownership for it for the foreseeable future, for the lifespan of the project's usefulness.
Yeah, great. And I don't know, Gunho, you're going to deal with this problem, but you haven't dealt with it yet. But have you been thinking about it, about how to develop that future community?
So yeah, several things. Right now what we do is that if we want to develop some feature, we first need to secure the fund to do that. So either a grant or the customer paid upfront or whatever. We secure the money, then we can pay for the developers or contractor. And there is one case that when we first started the sign language feature, and then we hired a person there, and then actually he was kind of moved by what we made, so that he spread the word around his colleague or friends, and then the day after day, one person came up, he brought another person, friends, and then about 10 person, came to the site, and then they all wanted to contribute, and then so that they end up working together. And so, I know it is not always happening; it's just a rare case. But people want to, doing something that contribute their own community.
Yeah.
And then if they're just looking for the opportunity to do that. And so if we can provide that, there is always a great thing. And also, as John said, fostering the community and then giving them motivation is really either at the same time hard and also important.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Absolutely. It's something that we think a lot about in terms of how to better connect developers to projects on GitHub that have a social mission, and we haven't solved that at all. And then in addition to just even making that initial connection, how do you make that sustainable? And it seems like there are some maybe even like resources out there in which we can braid resources across multiple systems to support this work, so it's not always folks having to do it in the middle of the night after their second or third job. But we also need to make those avenues like quite easy for folks to be able to access. So no, I think about this a lot. Okay, great.
Great.
Well, with that, we're going to wrap up today's discussion and the panel discussion, and just another big thank you to John and Gunho for your time today and for sharing your experiences.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
Great.
Thank you.